Spoken. And of course, we are recording. Now, I'll hand over to John to introduce our speaker for you.
Thanks very much, Val, and welcome to everybody. I can't see everybody on the screen, but I believe there's a number of people here. So just to add my welcome to Val's, I'm John Stewart. I chair the UK Noise Association. And today we've got two really very experienced people. We've got Greg Scott, who's from New York and is in New York right now. Greg is the founder of Soundprint, and he'll tell you all about it, but it's a fascinating way of collecting, and it's an app of collecting information about the sound in venues right across the world. And he already has collected a lot of information, and that information can be very useful and interesting, not only to us, but for us to be able to put pressure on the authorities and on individual restaurants and individual venues to, if they're too noisy, to make less noise. The sound app can also be used, of course, by individuals. After Greg has spoken, Nigel Rogers will speak. Nigel is the founder of Pipedown, I think in 1992. The Pipedown, as many of you will know, is the campaign for freedom from pipe music. Nigel will talk a little bit more about that, about its work, but also will concentrate on something called Quiet Corners, which is part of Pipedown, which people can join, and it's something that enables you to find a venue that is Muzak free. So that should be very interesting indeed. The two speakers together will speak for about half an hour, and then we'll have half an hour of questions and discussions. You're all very welcome to participate. Put your questions in the chat if you can. If you can't, no problem. Just raise your hand and we'll take your contribution. So with that, it's over to you, Greg.
Okay, thank you. Pleasure to be here and to meet you all. And I will go through a presentation. I'll skip over some slides in the interest of time, but love to tell you, excited to tell you more about Soundprint. And here we go. So basically, I'll tell you the story of how this company and app got started. I have hearing loss and I live in New York City. And in my quest to find love and finding dating spots, I would go to Google. I would Google quiet spots, East Village, quiet spots, Upper West Side, or I would go to Yelp, or I would go to Open Table. These are restaurant aggregators sites in the United States. I'm not sure how prevalent they are in the UK, but the point being is I would Google these quiet spots, and then I would often pick them to go meet my dates. And probably 98% of the time, the place was not quiet at all. There'll be music blasting, or the tables would be too close to each other, or the acoustics were just awful. And most of the time what ended up happening was, as you can see on the left side, the place would be too loud. And I felt like the guy on that right, in that right picture, where I could not connect with my date, and it just caused a lot of anxiety in me whenever I would pick a place to go out on a date. And so basically, I created an app called Soundprint that's been known as Yelp for Noise. It's a crowdsourcing app. I will show you a video, a 2-minute video exactly of what it looks like, so you'll see it. But basically, it allows users to discover venues based on how quiet or noisy they are. These are users, anybody can download the app, and you take a measurement and then you submit it to the publicly accessible database. And then once you have a database of noise levels, the goal is to work with venue managers to monitor and improve their sound levels, but also from a hearing health perspective, is to provide data to noise pollution advocates, hearing health professionals like audiologists or public health, acoustic designers and engineers, as well as the World Hearing Forum, which is part of the World Health Organization. And so this is just basically, there's two main functions to the app. One is that you take a measurement and you submit the sound level. You can see in the middle screen there, the user can nominate a place to be added to a quiet list candidate so that when somebody goes to the app, you can quickly see which places have been nominated as quiet. It's sort of like a bag of nomination on top of a venue that's been measured as quiet. And then you can also submit a noise complaint, which you'll see on the right part of the screen. And I'll talk about what happens after the noise complaint. And then the user, once all these data is submitted into the database, you can see on the first slide is the map of PIN color-coded based on sound levels, or a list version based in the middle. And then you can kind of see the timestamps on the third screen to your right. For example, between 6 and 10 p.m., a restaurant called Curio has been measured as quiet, but between 11 and 6 p.m., it's 77 dBA, which is noisy, but between 5 and 11 a.m. is moderate, and then aggregated all together based on 4 sound checks is moderate. Okay, so here, I apologize, the sound isn't working, but you can read the closed captioning on the bottom, and it's a 2-minute video about how the app works. See, they just recommended it to the quiet list without toggle. And this is the noise complaint. You can submit it. And here you're searching for venues. This is London, actually, with the filters. So basically, that's a very quick overview. Hopefully you can get a visual sense of how the app works. But basically the key benefits of the SoundPrint app is that, especially for the iPhone, the decibel meter is calibrated across different devices within the iPhone ecosystem. We do have select Samsung mainstream smartphone models that have the objective decibel meter. Samsung, the Android ecosystem is incredibly difficult to get accurate calibration. So if you have a mainstream Samsung phone like the 9, 10, 20, 21, you should have the objective decibel meter. But if you have a Pixel or a Motorola, we compromise with a trade-off, and you can submit a subjective level of measurements. It's basically an easy to use, intuitive design. And the goal is to also incent venue managers to optimize your acoustics for improved sonic environment or compliance with noise ordinances. This is just a quick summary of the advantages of a smartphone versus logging around a big Type 1 sound level meter. You know, the layperson, everyone, not everyone, but so many people have smartphones. It's easy to carry around. It's easy to whip out your phone for 15 seconds, take a measurement, select the venue, and then the biggest value is that it has enormous potential for large sets of data. evidence-based data that we can use for noise pollution awareness and advocacy. So this is just stating that the features that you can recommend a venue to the quiet list to promote the quieter venues, and then to be added for consideration in the city-based quiet list, which is something we put on the website. So when London has, 3,000 plus submissions, we scan the data and we select a curated list of quiet venues. And then we would do a press launch with the London press, and then get more people aware of soundprint and noise pollution and hearing health awareness. Same thing as with the noise complaint. You can request the management to mitigate or optimize the noise. What we do is we contact the venue with inexpensive and free tips on how to optimize the acoustics. And if they express an interest, we can put the venue in touch with acoustic professionals. I think it's important to note that despite the nomenclature of the term noise complaint, our mission is to work with the restaurants or any venue to optimize or improve their acoustic, if not to call them out as if we're the government. Wanted to mention that there is a market for this. People have responded to Soundprint and also the mission to raise hearing health and noise pollution awareness. Many entities are coming on the market to do so. We have 170,000 plus users across 130,000 submissions. Originally, all of our users were in the US, 100%, and that the US market now is 82%, with Canada, Mexico, and the UK having the biggest growth. And then after that, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and Australia. We have 20 cities with quiet list of restaurants, London probably coming soon. And the fact that we've gotten a lot of press says a lot that people do care about this issue. They just perhaps needed, one part of it is that they wanted a tool to help advocate for themselves when they're in noisy places. Demographics in terms of our users, I was surprised to find out that in terms of the usage, it's pretty consistent across age groups. You hear a lot in the press that, baby boomers have hearing loss and that they're a sizable demographic, but the data shows that a lot of people in their 20s and 30s are also using the app, but also many users who use the app have normal hearing, and they use it for behavioral situations such as a date, a business meeting, or a family dinner. Also wanted to mention that the focus of this presentation is on restaurants and bars, but Soundprint covers submission for all types of venues: coffee, tea spots, retailer, gyms, especially spin classes, arenas. We get a lot of user inquiries and submissions on churches, industrial work settings, event spaces, and anything that's basically in a Google or Foursquare database, you'll find on the app. So why, this is just a few additional slides, just kind of showing the proof of concept that a lot of press is showing that diners are getting frustrated with the difficulty of hearing others in loud venues. I think I'm preaching to the choir with this audience, so I don't think any of this will be surprisingly new, but Zagat Surveys, which is a big restaurant aggregator site in the States, I'm not sure if it's prevalent in Europe, showed that among diners, noise is the #1 complaint in major cities of New York City, Boston, and San Francisco, and if not, the #2 complaint. This is just a sample of media reports showing a rise in the complaints of loud noise. Also wanted to show a data use case. A lot of times, at least when I tell people about the app, I say, well, there's no quiet restaurants anymore. I don't think the app, will show much. Well, we basically classified sound into 4 categories of quiet, moderate, loud, and very loud, based on the ability to have a conversation and whether it's safe or dangerous for hearing health. Dangerous for hearing health would be very loud, 80 plus dBA. And so is it true that there are no quiet restaurants? Well, we did a big survey looking at the data of New York City a few years ago. At the time, 3,000 restaurants and bars. And here's the data that showed for restaurants, 29% of the restaurants that were measured were conducive to conversation, and 10% of bars were. I'd like to note that this data is limited to primetime days and hours. So you're thinking Thursday, Friday, Saturday evening between 7 and 9 p.m. for restaurants, and then bars probably 8 to 11 p.m. And then what I find from a hearing health perspective, how the data can be useful is 31% of New York City restaurants endanger the hearing health of patrons and employees. So that's a pretty high figure. Not surprisingly, bars at 60%. But when you look at the restaurant, there are certain areas in New York City, such as downtown and the East Village, West Village, which is where a lot of young people go out. More than half of the restaurants were endangering the hearing health of patrons. They're so loud, and they're probably the same case for London. As I was just telling people at the beginning of the call, that I was just looking at the London data, and the London restaurant dining scene during prime time days and hours shows that London dining scene is the noisiest in Europe and the second noisiest worldwide, only behind San Francisco. So we'll be looking at the London data, the UK data. If anybody's here interested in getting that data or talking to us about it and doing something with that data from an advocacy perspective or a commercial perspective, just reach out. I'll show the email at the end of this presentation. This is just a few slides on why venues should care about acoustics. This is if there's venue managers in the audience here today, and noise and auditory cues play a large role in a patron sensory or dining experience. The noise can put diners in a worse mood than they otherwise have been. There's also health issues with the noise eliciting stress and anxiety, increased cortisol, and just also from a social perspective, frustration with the inability to hear and connect with companions while being out in a noisy place. We're showing evidence that patrons increasingly care about noise, but feel like nothing is being done. This is prior to releasing the app or other companies that have come on board trying to do something about noise. Soundprint's own survey show that due to noise, 52% of patrons have left the restaurant never to return. So this has impact from a financial perspective on their own restaurants. You'll see that there was a study of restaurants that showed that once they addressed excessive noise, the revenue increased 10%. They also get to protect employee hearing health. And also with COVID, noisier venues can cause people to speak louder, thereby possibly raising the risk of COVID transmission. So just another angle or insight by which to promote quieter places. That can be undertaken to optimize the acoustics. There's a misperception that noise doesn't, needs to be quiet, but that's not necessarily true. It can be reduced and mitigated. A place can be loud and exciting and still be optimized for acoustics and conversation. But what really matters is whether the acoustics can allow people to converse in a noisy setting. And by noisy, I mean that doesn't damage hearing health, but can still be noise. So these are steps that can be done. It's just a fly down way for venue manager to optimize your acoustics. Consider them, them during the design when they're designing the place, rather than having it be more expensive after they get noise complaints. It's just an inexpensive way to mitigate noise levels. I'm about to wrap up. You can analyze the space for sound absorption materials. You can purchase relatively inexpensive customizable material, relocate loud machines and service station, change the direction of the speakers so certain areas of a venue are quieter than others. Think about carpeting, rugs, tablecloths, upholstery, drapes. And then for something more intense, we can put the venue managers in touch with acoustic consultants that we partner with. And so that's kind of just a brief overview of Soundprint. If you want to stay, be in touch, send me an email or stay apprised. You can go to the website and sign up for the newsletter on the way bottom right of the website, soundprint.co, it's not com. And so that concludes the presentation.
Greg, thank you very much indeed for that. That was fascinating and full of really interesting information. We'll take questions and discussion in a moment or two, but first of all, we go to Nigel. And as I said before, Nigel is the founder of Pipe Down, the campaign for the freedom from pipe music based in the UK. It's all yours, Nigel.
Well, John, thank you. Greg, that was really interesting, fascinating. Particularly the news that London is the second noisiest city in the world after San Francisco, but depressing, but not very surprising perhaps, as it is bloody noisy. But the UK is full of very noisy cities because in the UK, as far too many places, noise is still not recognized properly as a pollutant, as a health damaging pollutant. It's still just seen as a minor irritation. Now, you were talking about, just towards the end of your presentation, about the problems of how to deal with noise in bars and restaurants. One of the things is the furnishings, the fabrics and so on that decorate and furnish places these days. When I began this campaign 30 years ago, good heavens, many places still had carpets and curtains and had a lot of wood and cushions and so on, because that was still the fashion. Now, the great thing about all those things is they absorb sound. They don't reflect it. They don't aggravate it. Yeah. Now we have a completely different aesthetic, which is much more strict, vaguely industrial looking, and from bare walls, bare floors, etc., bare windows, and everything, the noise echoes anyway. That's even before you take into account adding music. The sound from people talking and the sound from even sort of crockery and cutlery clashing together can be aggravated and made much worse. Now, it so happens a few years ago, Pipe Down, in collaboration with the Royal National Institute for the Deaf, which at that time was calling itself Action on Hearing Loss, but it's gone back to calling itself Royal National Institute for the Deaf. Don't ask me why, but it is doing the same thing. It's a large, well-established, well-funded charity in the UK, which has been going for about 100 years, employs a lot of people. And we went around various restaurants and so on and tried to persuade them to rethink and try to do something to reduce the noise, echoing the noise aggravating aspects of their decor. This is, of course, particularly the case if they got pipe music, but you don't have to have pipe music for restaurants to become far too loud. And we had some successes, but unfortunately, the Royal National Institute for the Deaf people only seem to be employed on about 6-month contracts, and the people who are sympathetic and enthusiastic about this particular aspect moved on, and their successors have not been so enthusiastic. So that particular thing is in limbo. That campaign is in limbo for the time being, but it shows what can be done. Pipe Down has long had quiet corners, long before we had any website, and certainly before everyone began using websites, but Quiet Corners is now a very well-established website. Anyone can look at it, but to add places to it, which I'm constantly asking people to do, I do ask people to join Pipe Down because they need to have some control over it and make quite certain that some sort of troll or mischief maker isn't coming in and adding some of the noisiest places in Britain or elsewhere to it without me knowing. I don't go around every restaurant or bar or hotel listed, of course, and listen in. I couldn't afford to do so even though I had the time, but I don't have the time. So we rely on people's informed goodwill, and it is useful. It's at quietcorners.com, and you can find it. It's linked to the Pipe Down website, and it will tell you what to do and how to navigate it. You can also download the app, so when you're out, you can look at it on your phone. On the whole, that's working pretty well, but there are days when it's not working so well. I beg your indulgence on that. I don't actually deal with that side of things, but our webmaster does. It is a useful tool, but it's nothing like as useful as yours, Greg. My problem is that the average age of a typical pipe downer is probably well over 60. And although some of them are brilliant at using smartphones, whether iPhones or Androids, others don't want to do that. And I always think that people shouldn't be pushed or forced into using these things, even though they are very convenient and do offer a tremendous potential tool in our battle against pipe music. We don't have a great many really young members, which is a pity. I must stress that when I started Pipe Down 30 years ago, I was still in my 30s. I was obviously not any longer, but I think it was a problem for young people then. I think it's a problem for young people today. Too much noise damages the hearing, and it causes, even when it's of a level not sufficient to actually physically damage your hearing, well below, say, 80 decibels, it can still cause all kinds of other health problems, though, including, of course, stress. I am more and more concerned about the problems of people who have to work in such places, whether they're restaurants and bars or shops or anywhere else, because I think they have to endure it throughout the day, 8 or 10 hours or more. It may damage their hearing. It'll certainly damage their overall health very often, especially if they dislike it. But even if they're not really aware of it, we now know that what you might call subliminal noise, in the sense of not being actively noticed or objected to, has a bad effect on the health. It raises the blood pressure and the pulse. It encourages the production of stress hormones like cortisol and so on. But I think there are probably subtler psychological ill effects. Finding this out and proving it and getting it across to the restaurants and the other places that are constantly beaming out pipe music still is an uphill task. Some of our members are wonderful. They will go head to head with either the institution or the individuals concerned, and they score notable successes. But it's still the prevailing ethic in Britain, alas, is that the more noise, the better a place is. This applies to everything from department stores to supermarkets to shops, restaurants, pubs, and no amount of patient reiteration of the facts, of the objectively researched facts, seems to have much impact. But it, most of the time, and then suddenly, like banging your head against a brick wall, you find that you're not banging your head against a brick wall, but you're pushing against the door that opens, and they say, oh yes, yes, we will get rid of our pipe music. This has happened several times, but unfortunately, I have to say, sometimes the door closes again afterwards. This classically seems to happen with Marks and Spencer, which is still a very big department store on the British High Street. And they seem to, every second year, they seem to change their minds about pipe music. Nonetheless, we've had a lot of successes, and we continue to bang away at it, quietly, of course. And I will encourage people, members, to think about downloading your app, Greg, because I think it is a tremendously powerful tool with huge potential around the world. Because after all, not everyone stays in their own country, and particularly when you're traveling in a foreign city, you want to find somewhere reasonably quiet if you possibly can. Quiet Corners is pretty UK orientated. There are some places on continental Europe, but I don't think there's anywhere outside Europe, nothing in the US or the wider world at all. So we need something beyond Quiet Corners, certainly. And meanwhile, despite all the distractions of COVID and the Ukrainian war and everything else that understandably preoccupies people, we continue to battle to try to get legislation through Parliament, where we got quite close on a couple of occasions to getting a bill through to ban pipe music. Not everywhere, that would be quite grossly illiberal, but to ban it in places where you literally can't escape it, most obviously hospitals and health centres where people may be very ill, and on the whole, older people who object more to noise tend to be the people who fall ill more often and have to use hospitals and doctors' surgeries and so on. One of these days, I think we'll get there, but it is an uphill struggle. And sometimes the gradient doesn't seem to be getting any easier, but we keep fighting, as indeed everyone else involved in the noise world does. And it's, I think, ultimately more and more people are becoming aware of the problems of noise, whether in the US, the UK, or around the world. I think I've probably said enough now, because Greg's wonderful presentation has said so many things. And Pipedown's website, of course, which is updated pretty regularly, can tell you even more. If you want to, if people are listening to this from outside the UK, please do consider starting your own campaign against pipe music, because these things are local conditions, and both legally and otherwise change from country to country. And what may be very appropriate in the UK may be totally inappropriate in another country, but I don't know that, because I don't live in them. Local knowledge is terribly important, local activity. We do have 1 or 2 local branches, sorry, not local, national branches elsewhere, most notably in Germany, but also in Austria. And there was one that opened up in Ann Arbor, but it seems to have gone quiet. It's not, and there was one that was opening up in South Africa. That's gone quiet too. But I suppose people lose enthusiasm, but we need to keep battling for decades. This is a decade-long fight. It's a real long battle. John, I think I've said my spiel.
Nigel, thanks very much. Great stuff as ever. First of all, to say fairly obviously, I'm not Chris Buret, who was due to be facilitating today. Unfortunately, Chris has had to go into hospital yesterday for work on her eyes, so she can't be with us today. Secondly, welcome everybody who's here. In some ways, I begin to regret that we advertise the fact that we record these sessions, because I know the same thing happened last time as well. We had many more people watching the recording than we do actually come along for the live session. And I suspect the same thing will happen again today. Maybe there's a lesson for us there to give some sort of incentive, perhaps a free app to those who actually turn up on the day, and nothing at all to those who are watching a little bit later on. But just to let you know, the recording is taking place, and hopefully the link to the recording will be available tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, the day after. Well, 2 great presentations, and I think since there's just a small number of us here, if you feel like putting on your cameras, please do. It's not compulsory, but it is nicer to see people, particularly for the speakers. And that's great. Welcome. And if people have got any questions, I think just put your hand up, and I'll take them, and then we'll pass them on. Maybe while people are thinking of a question, I thought there's some from your present. Sheila, on you go. You put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Sheila White from Toronto, Canada.
Excellent.
Very
Welcome.
interested in what you're doing here. So I saw it online as I was searching. My topic is really litter, but noise kind of falls under the same parameters, behavior change. But I was just wondering if there's any movement that we've heard of where restaurants are setting up their own marketing plan to advertise themselves as quiet places. Come and have a quiet place to dine, and showing that it's commercially viable and that patrons would support this type of enterprise, or even an association of restaurants that share this belief that could start marketing themselves as quiet places. Is there anything like that?
That's a really interesting question, Sheila. Greg, Nigel, do you know if there's any places that market themselves as quiet?
I don't know. No, alas.
Greg?
They may describe it themselves in in the atmosphere, like a romantic setting, an intimate setting, but in terms of using the terms quiet, like on their own, have they gone out and marketed themselves as quiet? No. However, we have approached restaurants and said, your venue has been measured like very good. We've had ambassadors check out your restaurant. They get back to us and say the acoustics are great. Here's a sticker saying that you have been certified, Samprint certified to be on the quiet list. And then they get about it, they get the sticker and they're like, this is wonderful, and they put it on their window. Or when we have the curated quiet list, which you can see on the website, we've had venues do like some social media where they said we were awarded and put on the quiet list, but there hasn't been any systematic coordinated effort between the restaurants to promote themselves as quiet. One of the things on our task list is to approach the American Restaurant Association with this idea of a group of restaurants, somehow first get the restaurant industry widely aware of our quiet list and other efforts by other apps and other companies and organizations to promote them and then do that, but we haven't made substantial effort into doing that quite just yet. Our curated quiet lists are kind of designed to promote them, and the restaurants do respond to it, but they're not doing anything on their own outside of us contacting them and awarding them something. So it's a start, but a lot more can be done, and that's part of our awareness campaign and efforts.
Now, it'll be very interesting to see how they respond to that, Greg, because I would have thought for some restaurants and some venues, certainly who are trying to attract a particular demographic, maybe in a particular geographical area, they could see it in their commercial interest to promote themselves as quiet. It'll be very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, especially since, you know, for places that are more expensive, you know, people
Yes.
who typically have disposable more income tend to be older and tend to, you know, get more frustrated by noisier situations. There have been venues we've spoken to where they were bothered by their noise complaints and they did something about it because they were aware they were losing patrons. So it's not, there's two prongs to it. One is, can their venue be placed as like a quiet place, and then can they make the venue acoustically treated so that it's not excessively noisy? So they're kind of two pronged, but they kind of fall into the same thing.
No, indeed. Nigel.
Well, it's fascinating to hear you say that, Greg, because Pike Down used to produce Little Blue and White. This place is Muzak free, or a quiet corner, and Muzak free, recommended by Pike Down. And I gave them out, and I encouraged members to go around, find quiet places and say, can we put this sticker up in your window? But the take up was disappointingly small, very small. I've only seen about 5 or 6 places across Britain with these stickers in their windows. I don't know why people don't want to put them up. I'd have thought they're not going to put off anyone who was just popping in. I'll ask the members again if they would like more of these things. It is a disappointment. I think it's a very good idea that they should have, the restaurants and bars and indeed hotels and shops should have these little blue or white or other stickers in. Though the take up, it was very disappointing. So I haven't had any more made, because actually they're relatively expensive things, these stickers. I mean, not hugely, but but it's an idea whose time might have come back again, particularly with your wonderful achievement, Greg. I think that really is encouraging us all.
Right, we'll go to Nigel Burton, and then then we'll go to Mike.
Nigel needs to unmute himself.
You are unmuted, Nigel, but we're not hearing you. Shall I go to Mike? Shall I go to Mike first, while, or you may want to put something in the chat?
You could check your audio
Okay.
settings. Check your
Okay.
audio settings and make sure your mic is at full volume under the
Right.
Zoom feature. Yeah.
Nigel's going to try coming back. While Nigel comes off silent mode, which you've gone in specially for this program, Nigel, I can tell. We'll go on to Mike.
Thank you. Hi. As was said earlier, I think a lot of management still associate very noisy places with very successful places. It seems quite perverse, but there's a kind of, amongst the clientele perhaps, the idea that this must be a great place, otherwise people wouldn't put up with all this noise or these high prices or whatever. There's something of that going on, I think. I pre-COVID anyway, regularly eat with ex-colleagues, about a dozen of us typically in a local quite nice restaurant, and we have this problem because we're all getting on a bit. And on occasions, we specifically asked to go to a slightly distant room, an upstairs room, and they tried to deter us by saying things like, but there'll be no atmosphere up there, there's only yourselves up there. And I think, yes, that's wonderful. But it's quite clear they're not being ironic or anything at all. They really think that would be a serious downside to our dining experience, the fact that we can't hear other people shouting around, or indeed the music. So that's quite a hurdle, I think, that we have to overcome.
Yeah,
It's
I
take
think
a while.
I think that's right, Mike. I think there is an assumption in many venues that people do want music, that possibly don't want excessive noise, but there's an assumption they do want music. End of last year, I was organizing a meeting, rather than a social event in an upstairs of a pub. And they came and said, "Do you want the music on?" And I said, no, we're having a meeting. And they said, "Don't you want on just a little quietly in the background?" And I said, no, we're actually having a meeting. So it's interesting. The assumption was that we wanted something more than we wanted some music. Right, Nigel, I wonder if
Can you hear me now, John?
we can hear you now, yes.
Oh, that's good.
Great.
It's very embarrassing for the music. It's on. It was just a few observations, really. I think much like Mike was just saying, I think there's this fashion that you have to have noise to have atmosphere and buzz in venues. But I've noticed that Tesco's and Morrison's have started having sort of quiet mornings for people with autism and other neurodiverse issues. And it just struck me as odd that that's seen as unique to have a morning with no background music, as opposed to the norm being with no background music. So no, and similarly, Greg, I wasn't aware of your app until today, so I've downloaded it. So I'll try it and I'll promote it to other acoustic consultants. So I think it's something they'd be interested in.
I'm not fully sure. So I'm hearing lots. I'm not fully sure I fully heard what you said or asked. Is there any way you can type it in the chat, maybe, or you're muted? At least to me, you are.
You've gone again, Nigel. Yes, Nigel was first of all saying. Nigel and I know each other, and Nigel works as a professional acoustic consultant, and he was saying he hadn't come across your app before, but really was very, very interested in what you had to say, and is looking to promote it amongst the acoustic profession in the UK. And the first point he made was really backing up what Mike had said about a kind of assumption that there will be background music in places. And the third point Nigel made was that despite all that, in some stores in the UK, they now have a couple of hours in the morning when they deliberately turn off the music, keep the noise down, so people with autism and what have you can shop in more comfort. And I think Nigel was implying that might be an interesting step for stores to take that they wouldn't have taken 4 or 5 years ago. So any comments from yourself, Greg?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for offering to share the app with professional acoustics field. If you need any info, just email me, be happy to help you out there if you need any content or anything like that. I think one of the reasons I want to hark back to a prior point about the expectation and the assumption that there should be noise. I think a lot of the issue is that people aren't aware of how dangerous these loud noise levels are, or they're not even aware of what compromises what a place is loud or not. And if you ask a lot of people, patrons, they'll tell you like this sound level sounds normal, but when you look at a decibel meter, it's like really loud. And then you point it out to them, like, oh, this place can be a lot quieter. And I think it's part of a noise sound level awareness of what constitutes a place as loud versus moderate. Because if so many places are getting louder, it becomes the new norm. And this is for both patrons and the venue managers. And part of the goal of using a data-based app is so that people can run a decibel meter and go, oh, this place is too loud, I need to protect my hearing. Or they can show the manager and say, look, objectively, this is too loud, and or the acoustic can be improved. And I think that's part of it. I also have seen more media reports and more articles about limited designated time where there's less noise. And I also like to comment that when I have spoken to venue managers, it's like when you make them aware of it, or they are not fully aware of it before, a lot of them, more than you would expect, want to do something about it. It's not a hopeless issue as I think a lot of people assume. And I think that I think I see that in the number of people who use the app and the emails we get from restaurants or venue managers. Now, there's a lot of venue managers and restaurants who, who they laugh at this or something, but that's not surprising. But there's also a large chunk of people who do recognize that it is an issue, and I do think that there's a sizable market here. And I'm rambling, but I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in there.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting that you're getting venues responding to you, not all of them positively, but at least some of them positively. And I'm not sure that would have happened, some years ago. Another related point which Nigel Burton has put in the chat, he says, I heard anecdotally that some fast and faster food restaurants may like their venues not to be too comfortable acoustically in order to speed up the table turnover. Now, we've heard that as well. We've had correspondence from people who worked in Pret a Manger, which is a fairly fast food restaurant in the UK. And we led our last newsletter with the story of one of the employees who was saying exactly that, and was also saying that they were using loud music in the kitchens so that the employees wouldn't start talking to each other and would get on with their work. And it was, the newsletter has just come out, but it's had a huge response from our readers who are just saying, this is believable because the guy is very credible, but if this is happening, it is pretty shameful.
This is a true story. An acoustic professional here in the States, based on the East Coast, I was talking to, told me the story when he was approached to help do the sound acoustics of the retailer store Abercrombie and Fitch, because employees started complaining that the noise was too loud, and it went up to upper management. The management responded, we're not changing the noise because the loud noise keeps the teenagers in, it brings them in, and it keeps the parents out. So I was very surprised to hear that, like, so verbatim. I've seen that consultant report where they're encouraged to play louder music to turn tables over. I think that's been, I've heard that repeatedly many times. The one thing I think is also interesting is some people want louder noise, but maybe not necessarily in a loud setting. So when we look at the coffee shop data, like the coffee and the tea places, and users reach out to me, they tell me that they want to find noisier coffee shop, not endangering hearing health noisy, but like 74 dBA, 75 dBA, which is pretty loud for a coffee shop. And the reason is they want to be able to do their phone calls without bothering other people. They want to be able to work from these coffee shops. And if a place is too quiet, they feel like they're imposing on other people. So people also use it to find noisier places. Just an interesting insight.
That is interesting. Nigel Rogers, any thoughts from yourself about these last few points that have been made?
Well, I think that the idea that music is sometimes used to discourage patrons from lingering, to make them eat their fast food fast and move on, is absolutely true. It's been proved and shown again and again. McDonald's is a classic one, but there are many others, Pret, etc. The fact that the music is being used in kitchens at Pret, I think, is it's real news, it's horrifying news, but it's not surprising news, because I think the management often treat their staff in disgraceful ways like that. They're not really concerned with their well-being, mental or physical at all, but they should be. It's just as much, noise is just as much a health issue as anything else there. As for but it's interesting also what you said, Greg, that some younger people actively seek out noisy places. Well, I think that, you know, as far as the generality of the population would go, they'd say that's great, not a problem, but please, you know, don't assume that what teenagers or people in their 20s or even early 30s think is necessarily the norm, the desired norm for the whole population. We don't want it loud. Most people don't want it that loud. They'd actually prefer it a lot softer. By getting that message across is very difficult. And what you also said, a point that you made a little bit earlier, Greg, is that very often places that are upmarket, more expensive, tend to be quieter. Not always, but they do tend to be, because they assume that older clients like it quieter, which is probably true, and also older clients are wealthier and spend more. I'm not certain that is always true, actually, not nowadays, but it's, that is an assumption we could certainly exploit from the, because I'm looking now more at trying to get places quiet. I'm really speaking on behalf of that part of the population at age, say, 50 plus, which probably covers, I don't know, nearly half the population now.
Okay, thanks for that, Nigel. Frank, you wanted to make a point.
Yes, there's a question for Greg, John. Basically, I wanted to ask Greg if he knows of any legal action that's been taken by employees who've been subjected to music at work. I mean, do you know of any cases where individuals have said, look, enough is enough. This noise is having a negative impact on my well-being at work, and invoking the force of the law, either private law or law under the statutory controls over the workplace.
I know of one case that happened here in New York City several years ago. The hostess sued. It was like a restaurant combo nightclub in Midtown, and she got hearing loss, and she sued the owners because they didn't provide earplugs or suitable earplugs or something like that. She sued them. It got settled, so I never knew what the outcome of it was. I've spoken to several people who knew about her, but there weren't, no more details were revealed, so I don't have explicit knowledge of it. But that is a definite use case in industrial settings, industrial work setting, where people can use an app, and if they're afraid to speak publicly, they can make a noise complaint or something on the app, and then show it on evidence-based data that the place is excessively noisy. The thing with our app is we actively do not encourage people to use our evidence-based data for legal purposes. It's really more for lay people, to put people on notice for a variety of reasons, meaning there's a lot of things that can contribute to a high noisy decibel meter on the app, such as, you could have a glass, if you have the measurement and it's not like you have like an object in front of it, it could be close to your voice, like a lot of things can impact it. But by and large, as an approximation, it does a good job, and people can use it to make complaints about their employers, and had a couple of people inquire about that. But in terms of like a legal suit, there's only one that I know of offhand.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Greg. Right, any further points or questions people want to make? Nigel, anything from anybody before I go to the two speakers for a kind of final couple of minutes each, or a few words each? No? Nigel, do you want to just, any last words from yourself?
Well, a point I made earlier about noise not making the headlines or even the inside pages too often because it keeps getting shunted away because of war in Ukraine or COVID or whatever. It's true, but I think we've simply got to regard that as background noise, as noise we've got to fight our way through. That applies to all things, and I don't think we're going to come back to a sort of situation of idyllic or semi-idyllic peace and calm anytime in the foreseeable future. So I think we are all going to keep campaigning, I know, but we can't just hold our breaths. I did pause the Pipe Down campaign 2 years ago when COVID first hit us, because a whole lot of people are not going out. They're not going to be upset by pipe music in restaurants and so on. But ironically, during the COVID pandemic, of course, the world got a lot quieter, which some people appreciated very much, and an awful lot of the natural world really loved. But unfortunately, the noise has gone back up again. I don't think we've learnt very much from that. It's difficult, but what Greg says is tremendously inspiring, and I'm going to, if you don't mind, Greg, I'm going to bring it up in our next newsletter to mention it, though I don't think all members of Pipe Down will necessarily want to use the app. They're probably not terribly high tech conscious like that. Some will, some won't.
Excellent, thanks, Nigel. And that's seamlessly on to Greg for a few last words.
Thank you. I guess last words, basically, I think the best thing, we can do to help the group is if you want access to our data or the research or anything, be happy to provide it and work with you on ways to promote noise pollution or hearing health awareness. It's a huge part of the social mission. I think also a biggest help is whenever you're out, take a measurement with the app, because you're voting, you're signaling to venue managers and the public every single submission. It's kind of like voting with, here in the States, we talk about voting with your feet. You move if you don't like your state's taxation and laws. So same thing as you're voting with every submission to make a sound check, recommend a place on a quiet list or submit a noise complaint. It's little baby stuff that in the long run make a huge difference. So happy to work with anybody, to talk to anybody about this. And thank you for allowing me to present.
No, it's been absolutely great, Greg, and we definitely will keep in touch. Yeah. Well, just over to you to close our session.
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much, Greg and Nigel. Greg in particular, and I think this is something that is going to be really useful to the UK Noise Association. Just as we did back in the day, one of the big step forwards for us was making contact with people like Arlene Bronsaft in New York, who made that connection between noise and health. And I think your app, again, will open a lot of doors and give us an opportunity to highlight the issue again, albeit in a different way, focusing on venues particularly. But it also may be a key. One of the issues that we've had in recent times is connecting with a younger audience. And I think things like this app is something that the younger generation will be able to identify with. I think there are a lot of people in younger age groups who, once it's pointed out to them, as you have said, that they will appreciate a quiet environment for socialising. So I think there's a great opportunity here, for the UK Noise Association particularly to connect with you. And I think I will talk to John and Nigel and Frank, who are part of the team, afterwards about having a section maybe on the website to help promote that. So we very much welcome you speaking to us today, and hope you'll stay connected. And then it leads quite nicely into advertising our next webinar, which is not till the 30th of June, but it's with a Professor Stephen Stansfield, who's well known to us, the UK Noise Association, and maybe lots of others. He was our connection with noise and health, and he's done a lot of research into noise and health, and have been a big advocate. In recent times, I understand he's hosted a World Health Organization I'm not sure whether that's a webinar thing on noise and health, but he's going to be speaking at our next webinar. So I think that will lead quite nicely into the webinars that we've had, starting with Law, my neighbour noise one, and the one today talking about noise in venues, and connecting that with the health issue, which is, I think, is key to it, and something that's very important for us to try and connect with the media and the wider message, and trying to get noise. As Nigel says, it tends to fall down, but I think the noise and health connection is so important, and I think that will be our key in the future. So thank you again very much, and thank you all for joining us tonight. And I hand back to John.
Well, no, that's it. Thanks again, and thanks for your message there, Sheila, and note your website as well. So thank you for that, and have a good evening, as they say. Or I think for Greg and Sheila, it's probably the rest of the day. Enjoy your afternoon. So,
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Greg.
Bye.
Bye, Greg.
Thank you.